Hello, I'm Mrs H. You can find my patterns at www.mrs-h.com. In today's video, we're going to be sewing the Stanley Satchel. This is a fairly classic satchel shape bag. We've got a nice sturdy base with some feet. We've got these flap accent straps with these strap keepers and strap ends. And then we've got a nice shaped side gusset, so the bag comes in narrow at the top. Got a long crossbody strap on this one. This one's doubled over. You can add any kind of accent rivets that you like to this. And then the flap closes with these two magnetic snaps. And inside the bag, you've got a zip pocket with this beautiful contrast back on it. You can add whatever kind of fabric you like there. I've chosen my flap fabric for my contrast inside my pocket, just for a bit of extra fun. And then on the front panel, inside we've got a double width slip pocket there, and I've used my contrast flap fabric for that slip pocket as well. So I've divided mine into two. You can divide yours however you like. The lining on this one fits really nice. There's slightly different pattern pieces for the lining to the exterior. It's just a really wearable bag. I like it. I think they're quite fun to sew. So gather your materials and let's get sewing. Right, first we're going to start with our exterior gussets. So you should have two side gusset pieces and one base gusset. Okay, so all we're going to do, they're interfaced but they're not stabilised yet. We are just going to sew these right sides together along these short ends. We use our regular seam allowance and our regular stitch length, and I'm going to back stitch at the start and the end. So our seam allowance on this is 3/8 of an inch or 1 centimetre. And I'm going to do the same on the other end as well. So match the straight end. The shaped end is going on the top. And do exactly the same, back stitch at the start and the end. Okay, there we go. Now, if you haven't used faux leather for the base, if you use something else that you can press, then I would recommend giving that a little press now. If you can't press it, like me, then just finger press it, that's okay. And you've got a choice. You can either press them to one side or you can press them open. Personally, I prefer to press them open, or finger press them open, because I think that reduces the bulk then when we come to sew our main panels onto this gusset. So all I'm going to do is just clip these open just to hold them temporarily. And from the right side, we're going to top stitch these seam allowances open. So we're going to top stitch either side of the seam allowance, and I'm going to sew at 1/8 of an inch away, or 3mm away from the seam. So I'm going to increase my stitch length to my top stitching length. If you find it hard to remember to change your stitch length back down again, then don't change your stitch length, but it does look really nice if you do. Okay, so pop that under your presser foot with the seam allowances open and line it up. You don't need to back stitch for this one. We're just going to sew one side of the seam 1/8 of an inch or 3mm away from that seam. And then I'm going to turn it around and sew the other side of the seam, again 1/8 of an inch or 3mm away from the seam. Okay, so I think that looks really nice and neat. So I'm going to do that on both seams and both sides of the seams. And that will keep that nice and neat. Keep the seam allowances open, reduce bulk. And we'll do the other side, the final side. There we go, lovely. Okay, so now that we've got our gusset piece together, so we've got our side gussets and our base gusset in the middle, we're going to add this to our foam stabilizer. So let me mark the centres before I do that. I've had a bit of a tidy up, I can't find anything. But, hopefully I'll be able to find what I need when I need it. That's the problem with having a tidy up, isn't it? Things are not instinctively where you expect them to be because you've put them where they belong. Right, so I've pre-cut my foam into hopefully the right size. But if yours is still a rectangle, that also works really well. Just cut your piece of foam into a nice rectangle. Sew on your gussets and then trim it down to size. That's fine. Okay. So I'm just lining up my centres. Well, when I said I'd cut it to size, I think I must have forgotten seam allowances, but that's okay. I will just clip along these long straight edges because this is really nice and simple. And we'll just pretend that these shaped ends are straight. Okay. So we're going to sew this into place using a 1/4 inch seam allowance because our seam allowance for the bag is 3/8 inch. So that's 6 mil and 1 centimetre respectively. So if we sew it at a 1/4 inch, then we can trim it down and it will still be in the seam, but it will keep the majority of the bulk out of the seam. I've just got one green clip and one pink clip, that's okay. So I'm going to increase my stitch length to my longest stitch length and then pop this under the foot. I'm going to sew this standing up so I can see what I'm doing. Hopefully I can sew straight then, in theory. And I'm going to go around all of the sides of this. So I'm sewing at a 1/4 inch or 6 mil from the edge. Right, so I've sewn around all 4 edges there, and all we need to do now is trim the foam away from these seam allowances. So all you do is turn your piece over, pull the foam back and just trim as close to those basting stitches as you can. It doesn't matter if you trim a few of your basting stitches, don't panic too much. I'm just holding my scissors at an angle there. Just get as close to the seam as I can. I'm just going to go around all 4 sides of this piece. all the way to the end. A bit of a long piece this, but by sewing it together and then adding the foam, we just reduce the bulk in those seams where we're joining the gusset pieces together. Okay, lovely. So that is our gusset ready. That's quite nice, quite pleased with that. I think that will look good. So we're just going to do exactly the same with, here's some I pinned earlier, the flap and your two main pieces as well. Okay, so your two main panels and your flap. So they should be interfaced already, and we're going to add foam the same as we did before. I'm just going to move my sewing machine a little bit closer towards me. Okay. So exactly the same principle. My same longest stitch length, my basting stitch length, and I'm sewing at 1/4 inch seam allowance, or 6mm. Okay, we'll sew these two exactly the same. I'm just moving my little label around so I don't forget to add it, because I always forget to add it. I'm trying really hard not to forget. There we go. Right, that's all of the pieces done. Oh, here are my scissors. Okay, so just take these pins out, and then we can trim the foam back from the seam allowances the same as we did on the other piece. Take the pins out this one as well. You don't need to pin as many times as I do, but I like to be sure that it's going to stay in place while I'm sewing it. Okay, just take this out of my flap piece, and then we'll trim. Okay, so same as we did before. Just turn it over and trim as close to the stitches as we can. Okay, so we go around all four sides, same as we did for the gusset. Feel free to fast forward me if you've already done this bit and you don't want to sit watching me cut. Not the most interesting thing to watch, apologise. Okay, be nice if we could fast forward ourselves in real life, wouldn't it? And then I could fast forward myself now and get on with the fun bit of sewing. Okay. So these panels I've just interfaced and then added foam, exactly the same as the gusset. I haven't added anything else in extra. If you want a particularly sturdy bag, you could add a bit of firm interfacing onto the foam before you attach the foam onto your exterior panels if you wanted. That would also work. That could be a nice sturdy bag. I wouldn't recommend it for the flap, because you want your flap to have a nice rounded shape as it folds over the main bag. But for your main panels, that would definitely be a nice addition if you wanted a slightly sturdier bag. Okay. Nearly there. Halfway there on this last piece. I can hear my iron just gently steaming away next to me. like it's a little steam train waiting to leave the station, which is quite nice. Don't worry, you'll get your turn. Okay, right, so that is all of our exterior pieces prepped. We can pop those all to one side and worry about those afterwards, and we're going to get started on the lining. Okay, so for this you are going to need your lining zip, or your zip that matches your lining. You can take these tags off. Got no use for these tags now. Okay. You'll also need your zip facing, which I've got here, your zip top, which I've cut out of my leaf fabric, which will give us a nice pop of colour inside the zip pocket then. So when you open your zip pocket, that's what you'll see inside. It'll be a nice little surprise. And your zip pocket bottom, which is the same fabric as my lining fabric, and then my lining main panel as well. And before we go much further, I'm just going to mark my centres on these, because that will be really helpful later. So if you haven't done your centre marks, then just do that now in the top and the bottom seam allowances in the centre there. That will be really helpful. Let's see which piece we are using first. We're using this piece and the facing, so I'll hang on to that, and I'll mark the centres on my facing. Oh, actually that should have been on the wrong side for my facing. That's okay. And then the top and bottom pocket pieces, J1, J2 and J3 these are. J1 is the facing, and then J2 and 3 are for the actual pocket itself. Let's check I've got that the right way around. 9 inches wide, yeah. And we'll mark the centre of those as well. Right, so I'll pop the top and the bottom, J2 and J3, and the zip to one side for the moment. We'll get started on our facing. Just got the pattern next to me in the hope that I don't forget to tell you anything as we're following along the pattern. Right, so on the wrong side of the zip pocket facing, that's the wrong side, I'm going to draw a box, and I'm going to put the box 1/2 inch from each long edge, or 1.2 centimetres. So we'll draw that 1/2 inch first before we go any further. And 1/2 inch the other way as well. And oh dear, that wasn't very well done. Pretend that didn't happen. Okay. Oh, I should have edited that out, shouldn't I, without saying anything? Oh dear, the second attempt wasn't much better either. Let's try again. Practice makes perfect, eh? Right, and then we are going to draw a line 1 inch from the short ends. Just there. And just there. Okay, so ignoring that bit of wibbling there where I failed to draw my line straight, if I can rub it out, not very well. Okay, we are going to draw a little triangle in each end of the box, like so. And then we're going to draw a line along the centre to connect those two triangles. I forgot that we focused the camera on the desk, so apologies if that was a little bit blurry. Okay, so I've got my box with my triangles each end and a line in the centre-ish. So the line of the box should be 7 inches. Yeah, great. Right, so we need one line in main panel. We're going to place this on top 1 inch or 2.5 centimetres from the top of the lining main panel, and we're going to line up our centre marks. So pop your ruler with the 1 inch mark at the top of the panel, and then line up the facing along that line there. Okay. Let's add a couple of pins. I'm just going to add 1 each end just to hold this facing in place while we're sewing it. And we're going to sew around the entire outside of the box. So personally, I'm going to start around about there-ish, and I'm going to use my, change back to my regular construction stitch length, well remembered. I'm going to start there, sew all the way to the corner here. I'm going to stop with my needle down on this corner. I'm going to lift my presser foot and pivot. Sew to this corner, stop with my needle down, lift my presser foot, pivot, and then lower my presser foot again, obviously, and carry on sewing all the way around the box. Now, if you get towards these corners and you think, I'm not going to be able to make that with my stitch length as it is, it's going to overshoot or fall short, lower your stitch length right down to or number 1, or even lower if you want, just so you can get right into that corner and be really, really accurate. Okay, so I'm going to sew mine on my regular construction stitch length, and we'll start off and see how we go. So I'm sewing directly on that line on the outside of the box. Oh, I've gone over. Oh my goodness. How have I managed to do that? After all of that talking about it as well. Right, let's see if I've got a unpicker here. Should have edited that out, shouldn't I? Rather than telling you. Hang on, I've lost my unpicker. I've put it somewhere safe, ready to use, I think. Oh, there it is. Okay. Right, well, we'll use this as a teachable moment. And I'm just going to unpick those few stitches that I've overshot. Go back a little bit. You could, of course, unpick all of that if you want. I'm not going to. I'm going to carry on sort of ish a little bit in on the stitching, and then sew from there, and pay a bit more attention this time. Right, so I don't think I'm going to get there on my stitch length, so I've gone down to number 1 stitch length. There we go, and done 2 tiny little stitches to get to the end. I'll change back up. Okay, that was actually pretty accurate, so that's okay. I'll carry on now. Okay, and pivot. I don't know how I've managed to get it so accurate the last 2 corners when I overshot the first. Maybe it was just teasing me. Okay, and then we'll go back to where we started. So as long as you overlap by a couple of stitches, you don't need to worry about back stitching on this one. Okay, right, so ignoring that little bit of unpicking we did, trim my ends of my threads from where we stopped and started. Trim them on the back as well. There we go, lovely. Okay. Now what I like to do is give it a little bit of a steam before I cut anything. So I'll get my little tiny steam iron that's been steaming away very nicely over here on the side. Give it a little bit of a steam. Now if you watch my videos a lot, you'll notice that I'm using my tiny iron, and that's because I have tidied up and I have rediscovered it. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to pull this facing away from the lining and just press, nice bit of steam press that facing up away from the lining, and then I'm going to repeat that on the other side. On the top I'm going to press that edge down away from the lining. Now I think I've probably applied my facing so that it's going to be inside out or upside down, sorry, when I turn it through, but that's okay because nobody is going to see the facing. The facing is literally construction purposes only, so don't panic if you see me with it upside down. Right, so I've given that a really nice steam press. I'm quite pleased with that actually. I think that's even more effective than my big iron. And then I'm going to snip through that line in the middle just with a little tiny snip, and then I can cut along that center line as far as the triangle. Once you get to the triangle, then I'm going to snip out into the corners of this box, going as close as you can to those stitches in the corners without going through the stitches. You don't want to snip through the stitches, just as far as we can. If you don't go far enough, then you won't get a nice crisp finish on the corner. But if you go too far, you'll have yourself a little hole in your stitching. Okay, so once you've snipped that, you can always go a little bit further afterwards if you're not confident. You're just going to pop. That was a cross between push and pop. We're just going to pop this facing through to the back and give it a little press. And we're going to press from the right side. So I'm just going to fold that one little bit to start with and give it a little press with my tiny little iron. I think I might need to move, hang on, I need to move my cord around under the table. Oh, this seems a bit dangerous. Let's see if I can do it without being dangerous, because safety never takes a day off. There we go, that's better. Okay, well hopefully that's better. Okay, so I've pressed that little bit, so I'll fold a bit more back and press the next little bit. And then do a bit on the top of the facing. All we're doing is just making sure that this facing is on the back, but really nice and neatly. Okay, and to the ends. And we'll do both of the ends as well. Now the whole point of pressing from this side is because you are undoubtedly going to get creases somewhere when you are pressing this facing. Same as if you don't use a facing, you are bound to get creases on the pocket piece that you're pushing through. The key is that if you press from the right side, like we're doing now, then that controls exactly where your creases or your puckers are going to be. So if you turn it over, you'll be able to see that you've got creases or puckers in the four corners, but they're on the wrong side of the panel. So if you pressed from the wrong side to start with, then you'd end up with those creases on the right side of your panel. So we've pressed from the right side to ensure that our puckers are hidden on the wrong side. And oh my goodness, I did manage to get it right side up on my facing. Not that anybody's ever going to see it, but we'll know. Okay, so once you're happy that you've got your facing nicely pressed to the wrong side and your zip box opening is nice and neat, and you can pop this to one side and we'll get started on our zip pocket. Okay, so retrieve your zip pocket pieces, J2 and J3, and the first one we need is J3, the zip pocket bottom, and I'm using my main lining fabric for that. So I'm going to put my zip pocket top piece to one side. Now if you've got directional fabric, then do pay attention to the instructions in the pattern, because it will tell you where to go with your directional fabric. Right, so we're going to add a line of double-sided basting tape to the upper long edge of the zip pocket bottom J3. Okay, so I've got directional fabric, so I'm going to be adding mine at the top, so my words are facing the right way, and I'm adding it to the top edge there. I think the writing is so scripty, so scrolly, there's not much you can actually read on the fabric, but it's nice to know that it's the right side up, isn't it, even though it'll be inside the pocket. Okay, so I'll just take the backing off of my tape, and then I'm going to add my zip right side up, and I'm going to make sure that my zip pull on my opening is to my right hand side. Okay, so I'm just lining up these raw edges. I'll turn it around, and that's what it looks like from your point of view. Okay, so you've got the zip pull on the right there, and then we're going to baste this into place. Well, we're going to stitch it into place, not baste it, rather. Stitch it into place using a scant 1/4 inch seam allowance. Okay, and I am going to back stitch at the start and the end of this one. There we go. Okay, and then we're just going to fold this to the wrong side and give that a little press. Let me retrieve my tiny iron. I think that's what I'm going to call it from now on, my tiny iron. I quite like that. So you can press on either side, it really doesn't matter. Doesn't matter which side you press on, as long as you give it a nice little press. Lovely, looks nice and neat. And then our zip pocket top. Now if you've got directional fabric, then pay attention to the instructions in this next step. I haven't got directional fabric, so I don't need to worry too much, but I will complete the process as though I had directional fabric for you. So if you've got directional fabric, then add a line of double-sided basting tape to the right side of the upper edge of the zip pocket top. Okay, so if you've got directional fabric, make sure your line of basting tape is going onto the upper edge. Okay, and we're doing this on the right side of the fabric. My tape is not stuck too well there, give it a bit more of a press down. Okay, and then what we're going to do is we're going to turn this panel 180 degrees so the top edge is on the bottom, and then we're going to add this zip with the other panel attached. Okay, and give that a nice press down, and then we're going to do exactly the same as we did before. Use our scant 1/4 inch seam allowance, back stitch at the start and the end. Just moving my zip out of the way as I come close to it. Okay, and then we can press this over onto the wrong side. As I said, you can do it either way. Do it whichever side up you prefer. I do mine this side up, and then I know what's going on with my fabric. Just press all along that edge. So you should see, don't panic, the wrong side of your zip should be on the right side of your fabric, and the right side of your zip should be on the wrong side of your fabric. Okay, don't panic, that is intentional. Okay, so turn it around to your way. This is my zip pocket top, it's the longer piece, and that is my contrast fabric, and I've used the same as my flap. And then your bottom piece, zip pocket bottom, is from your lining piece, and that is the shorter piece there. Now we need to retrieve our lining main panel, and we'll add double-sided basting tape to the top and bottom edges on the wrong side, on the facing side of our lining main panel. Okay, it will all come clear once you've sewn this zip pocket. You'll see why we needed to do it one upside down and one not upside down if you've got directional fabric. This isn't the easiest zip pocket to do, but it does give you the nicest finish, I think. So it's worth pausing me and watching the video again if you make this again, just to be sure that you're following me easily if you're used to doing it a different way. Okay, so I've taken my backing tape off, and I'm going to pop my zip pocket onto the back here, making sure that all my pieces line up. So your zip pocket facing should line up with your zip pocket top and bottom. And then I'm going to flip it over and just double, oh dear, that is not very well aligned through the gap. So flip it over to the right side and line it up properly, how I should have done the first time. Okay, so just make sure that your zip is nicely aligned through that opening, and then give it a good press down to make sure that's fully adhered. Okay, make sure we're okay. Now I know that I've got my metal stopper in here somewhere because I left mine on. So I'm just going to make sure that I mark that with a pin before I do my next step. So now I'm going to sew with this flat. Okay, so your pocket piece is open. I'm going to sew around the entire outside of this box, 1/8 of an inch or 3mm away from the edge. So I'm personally going to start down here. I'm going to sew along and all the way around the outside of the box, same as we did before, pivoting as we get to the corners. I'm just going to leave my thread tails long because I don't want to back stitch on this one because I'm using contrast thread. So I'm going to leave my thread tails long and pull them to the back and tie them off just for a slightly neater finish. Okay, so if you've got a top stitching stitch length, then you can swap to that now and start with your needle down, because then you know that if you need to stop and readjust your hands, your needle is not going to go anywhere. Okay, so as I approach the zip pull, lift my presser foot, move the zip pull out of the way, lower my presser foot and carry on going. Okay, so as I come to this end where I know my metal stopper is, just making sure that I sew inside that stopper, not on the stopper. Okay, and then I'm going to leave my thread tails long and we'll tie those off. Okay, to pull these threads through to the back, then what you need to do is turn your panel over and then just gently tug on your bobbin thread and you should see a little loop forming, and that will be your thread from the front. So just pull that little loop and your thread should come through. And then all we need to do, because I've got all 4 of mine in the same sort of place, I'm just going to separate them off into 2 pairs and then just tie all 4 together in one go. So I'm just going to do 1, 2, you can do 3 knots if you want, I might, just to be sure, and then we can trim those off. And on the back you've got a little knot, but on the front just looks like continuous stitching all the way around, which looks much neater. Okay, right, so let's, hang on, I'm going to open my zip to halfway before I forget. And then on the back all we do is pull this top panel, zip pocket top, down to meet the zip pocket bottom, matching these bottom edges. Okay, so I know that the zip pocket top is longer than the zip pocket bottom. Match the bottom edges, and then you're just going to flatten out this little fold of fabric at the top. And having this little fold of fabric at the top means that when you put something in your zip pocket, it's got a little bit of extra wiggle space there in the pocket, a little bit of extra maneuvering room. Otherwise it would just pull on your lining fabric and you'd get a real unsightly pull there. So by having that extra little fold of fabric, just gives it a little bit of extra space so that you can pop things into your pocket without pulling on your lining fabric. Right, so we are gonna leave a huge turning gap in the bottom of our zip pocket. So it's up to you how big you leave it. You can sew onto this bottom piece if you want and then leave a turning gap, or you can just sew down the sides and leave the entire bottom edge open. At the top and the bottom of each of these side bits we're going to back stitch. We're going to use our regular construction length stitches on the sides, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to baste along the bottom edge using my longest stitch. I'm going to steam press those stitches, and then when I remove them to close the, or when I remove them to turn the bag through and then close the turning gap, I'll have a nice line of stitch holes left behind that I can follow to make sure that my closure is really, really nice and neat. So we're just going to stitch on the zip pocket pieces. So you can either stitch this way up and pull your lining panels back, or you can stitch this way up and pull your lining panels back. I think I'm going to do it this way. I'm just going to see where my metal stopper is. It's out of the way, that's great. So we're going to start at the top using our regular stitch length, regular seam allowance, and back stitch at the start and the end. Okay, so I'll do both sides first. And then I'm going to increase my stitch length to the longest stitch length and sew along the bottom as well, just so we've got something nice and neat to follow. Okay, there we go. So that's our zip pocket sewn up. Now before I forget, I'm going to steam press these stitches now so that I know they've definitely been steamed. I'm sure I will do it again later, but just so that we know they've been steamed, I'll do it now, just to be sure. Okay, I'm going to leave those stitches in until we come to turn the bag through, but I am going to open my zip all the way. So I've opened my zip and I am going to leave it open. Right, okay, so this can be popped to one side for now, and we'll need our slip pocket pieces. So I've got one out of my leaves, which is my flap fabric, and one out of my lining fabric. And all we're going to do is place those right sides together, matching up all the raw edges, and I'm just going to sew along this top edge, just add a pin to make sure that I'm sewing it straight. So swapping back down to my regular construction stitch length and my regular seam allowance, I'm going to back stitch at the start and the end. Just sewing along the entire length here. Okay, just trim these little threads off. And we're going to turn this right sides out and give it a press. But to make sure that you get a really nice top edge, what I like to do is open the seam allowance, just give it a little finger press. You can give it a steam press if you want. Let's go mad and give it a little steam press. And then I'm going to fold this over, and you should find that your seam, your top seam there, sits out really nice and neat and proud. None of it gets caught in the seam. Okay, and we'll give it a little steam press along the top edge. Okay, lovely. And then we can top stitch along this entire top edge. So I'm going to change to my top stitching stitch length, and I'm going to sew at 1/8 of an inch or 3 mil from the edge. There's no need to back stitch. Okay, lovely. Well, that does look nice. I've matched my thread really well to my fabric, so I'm quite pleased with that. And then we need our second panel, and we'll just pop that on top. If you want to do an extra step, you can baste around the edge first, but you don't need to. And then we're going to baste this into place around all the edges, just making sure that that's nice and even. Add in a pin or two. Okay, now, actually let's stitch that into place first, and then we'll worry about dividing it. So I'm just going to baste that into place, use my longest stitch length, and I'm going to sew at 1/4 of an inch or 6 mil seam allowance. Okay, right, so that is in place. So now you need to decide how you're going to divide this pocket, or if you're going to leave it the full width. I think that's a bit big and baggy to leave it the full width. Just mark my centres, which I didn't manage to do earlier. I did the other panel, didn't I? We'll pretend it's because I hadn't added my pocket on yet. We all know that's not the truth, but we'll pretend it, okay? There's my centre, and I'll mark my centre at the top as well, because it will help me when I come to add my 2 layers together, my interior and my exterior. Help make sure everything's positioned really nice and neatly. Okay, so I think I might just divide mine in half. I think that'll be nice and neat and fine for me and how I'm going to use this bag. So I'm just going to get my ruler and line up along the centre lines add a little chalk line down there. Now if you're going to mark it, make sure you're using something that can be removed easily. Okay, and then I'm going to change my stitch length back to my top stitching length, and I'm going to start at the bottom and I'm going to sew up to the top, back stitch a bit, pivot and sew back down again. I'm sewing up this line to the top, bit of back stitching, and then I'm going to lift my presser foot, pivot and sew back down on that line of stitches again. There we go. Okay, lovely. Right, I'll have to get a little bit of water, I think, and rub this chalk out, but it will rub out. There we go. Okay, lovely. So before I forget, let's add my label. Because my pocket is going into the seam allowance, I'm just going to add my label on top of the pocket, and I can forevermore be feeling smug that I have remembered my label. Okay, lovely. Okay, so you've got our lining panel with the zip pocket attached and the zip pocket open. Do you see what I mean about that lovely little pop of colour there inside your zip pocket? I think it looks great. And we've got our other lining panel with our slip pockets attached. Now we need our lining gusset pieces. So you should have your base gusset and 2 side gussets, and we are going to sew these together exactly the same as we did our exterior pieces. Okay, so I'm just going to get these ready to sew. I changed the pattern pieces slightly since I cut this out, so I'm just going to trim these down and then we'll get sewing. Right, so now my side gussets should look exactly the same as your side gussets, and what we're going to do is add the short straight ends onto the base gusset, same as we did for the exterior. The only difference is that these are slightly more shaped. Okay, it's quite fun cutting out directional fabric because you have to try and work out where the where it's going to be in the finished bag. Right, so we're just sewing this with our regular construction stitch length, regular seam allowance, I think. Let me just double check. Yep, regular seam allowance, and then back stitching at the start and the end. And we'll do that on both ends. And then we're going to press these seam allowances open and top stitch them the same as we did on our exterior, except we can hopefully steam press our lining fabric, unlike the exterior fabric, which I wasn't able to steam press because I'm using the faux leather. Okay, it's a nice finish that does, doesn't it? Nice and neat. And then I'll press these seam allowances open on this seam as well. And it's up to you if you want to top stitch to keep the seam allowances open. I am going to, because I think it's a really nice extra little feature inside the bag, and also it does help keep the seam allowances open. So I'm just going to whiz along at my 1/8 of an inch 3mm either side of the seam. hang on, I've lost where I am now. There we go. I've got my thread all tangled up. Well done. And the other side as well. Okay, right, I think I've got a few threads to trim here. Let's trim these. There we go. Okay. So what we're going to do now is whichever piece you want. Let me just double check. Right. Just wanted to double check I hadn't left a second turning gap, because sometimes I do and I forget what I do between one bag and the next. So let's mark our centres of our lining gusset, so we know we're lining up nice and evenly. Sometimes I like to leave a second turning gap in the lining, a slightly bigger one, and then I turn through that slightly bigger one, that second one, and then close that one using the zip pocket, but I haven't on this one, so that's okay. Right, so what we're going to do first is match the centres of your gusset to the main panel, right sides together, and then match the end to the top edge. Make sure that your edges are all nicely lined up. I know it's a bit of an angle. And then we'll do the second top edge. Oh dear, I've lost the pin. Okay. There we go. So it'll be lined up along the edge, but you will see that it's slightly angled, so don't panic. And then what we need to do is just ease this around the rest of the main panel. So what I like to do is just pin the straight edges first. So I'm going to pin along this base gusset piece, because that's nice and straight forward. I know that that's not got to go around any curves or anything. And then maybe a bit down the side. And you'll feel that it's starting to be a little bit tight then as you approach the corner. I like to sort of do a bit on one side, then switch to the other side, so I know that I'm doing it nice and evenly. Okay. So then these corner bits where it doesn't quite fit, what we're going to do is snip into the seam allowance from this seam onwards. You can do it the other side of the seam if you like. I'm going to try it just from the seam onwards. Just tiny little snips into the seam allowance, and then that will ease around this curve nice and neatly. Okay, we want a nice tight fitting gusset so that it's not really big and saggy, but we do want it to fit. So it's a bit of a balancing act. But I think that hopefully we've got it fairly accurate on this one, as long as you add your little snips in. Okay, and then just make sure that it's flat on the line where you're sewing. So I might have these little puckers here, but as long as it's flat where you're going to be sewing, then you won't end up with any puckers in that seam, and you'll just end up with a really nice curve. It should fit pretty perfectly. So I'll do the same on the other side. It's quite a nice curve on this one, it's not too sharp. I think a nice gentle curve always proves itself a little bit easier to add a gusset too. Okay, I've got a little bit more of a straight edge on this side that I haven't pinned, so I'll pin that. And then we can ease the rest of this gusset around. As I said, as long as it's flat where you're stitching, you'll be completely fine. Okay. Lovely. Right, so we're going to sew around this gusset. We're going to start sewing at the top edge here using our 3/8 of an inch or 1 centimetre seam allowance, and then after maybe about an inch or so, inch and a half, we're going to taper to a 1/2 inch or 1.2 centimetre seam allowance. Okay, so we'll change back down to our construction stitch length. And I'm going to back stitch at the start and the end. So just make sure that whatever you're putting under your foot is completely flat. Okay, so we're starting off on our 1/2 inch seam allowance, and now I've gone, 3/8 of an inch seam allowance, and now I've tapered to a 1/2 inch seam allowance. And as we come around to these corners, just make sure that you're flattening out that fabric so that directly where we're sewing is nice and flat. Along these straight bits. And then as we start to approach the end, we're going to start thinking about tapering back in to our 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. Just like that. Okay. So I'm going to take my pins out, and I'll double check this before I do anything else. I'm going to double check this and check I'm happy with it. If you're not happy with it, then you can always pick out a few stitches, smooth it out and redo it. Okay, but now is the time to check it and do that if you want to. So all I'm doing is having a little look, and you can turn it out and double check you haven't got any puckers. No, that looks great. Okay, so now I need to go and get my pinking shears, and we're going to trim this seam allowance with our pinking shears, and that will help it to sit nice and neat. Right, we've retrieved my pinking shears, so what we'll do, we just trim around these curves. You can trim all the seams if you like, but the curves is where we need to trim. If you haven't got pinking shears, then just snip into the seam allowance just to reduce some of the bulk, and it helps these corners sit a little bit neater inside where we've got these curves. Okay, lovely. So that gives you an idea of half of your lining of your bag, what it's going to look like. So now we'll attach the second half. So grab your second lining panel, and we're going to do exactly the same. We're just going to pretend that this first half doesn't exist. So we'll match the centres first. You can go all along this flat straight bit if you want, before we go on to the tops and the edges. Okay, and then we'll do the top edge first, and we'll go down the straight bit there and along this straight bit as far as we can go. Sorry, you can't see that well, that's flopped over like that, can you? And try and pull it out the way for you to see. But if you've got this in front of you, then it will be very clear what we're doing. Okay, just do the second side. Do the straight edge first. And then down as far as we can get. And then we'll snip into our seam allowance on the gusset, same as we did before. Okay, so I've done as much as I can do. I'm just going to snip into seam allowance, and then we'll ease this around the curve. So we'll just ease that around the curve and pin it. As I said before, just make sure that where you're sewing is nice and flat with no puckers, and you should be okay. So there might be a few little puckers further into the seam, but that's okay. Okay, so we'll ease this second corner in. And then we're going to sew it. We're just going to sew it exactly the same as we did for the first one. So on our regular stitch length, we're going to start and end on our regular seam allowance, but we'll taper to a 1/2 inch or 1.2 centimetre seam allowance. Back stitch at the start and the end. I've tapered now. As I'm approaching this curve, I'm just flattening out the seam allowances here. Okay, as I'm approaching this corner, I can see I've got a little pucker forming there, so I'm just flattening that out. So where I'm going to stitch is nice and flat. I can carry on. Pull the rest of this out of the way. Okay, and then as we get nearer to the end again, taper back in and back stitch at the end. Right, first thing we'll do, take the pins out, or clips if you're using clips. They've probably come out if you're already using clips though. And then we'll check inside, check on the seam line, make sure we haven't got any puckers, and then trim with the pinking shears. You can turn just your corners out if you want, just to have a little look, because it might look puckered until you turn the corner out, and actually it's not puckered, it's the bulk of those seam allowances. Oh, there's an extra pin there. Yeah, that looks great. Right, pinking shears. Okay, let's trim these curves on this side, and that will be our lining finished, and we can start working on the exterior now, which will be very lovely. Okay, just double check that all looks good to me. Looks good inside. And we've steam pressed our stitches. That can be popped to one side now. If I remember my label, I have remembered my label, well done me. That can be popped to one side now, and we'll get started on the exterior of the bag. Okay, next we're going to work on our flap accents. So grab those two, and on the wrong side, you'll also need your flap that we've stabilised as well for this bit. On the wrong side, we'll draw a line down the centre. So these are 2 inches wide, so we're going to draw a line 1 inch in. So that is 2.5 centimetres, and we're going to draw a line 1.2 centimetres if you're working in metric. Now if you're using faux leather like me, then you'll want to follow what I'm doing. If you're using cottons, then you'll be able to press your flap accents. It'll be a little bit easier for you, but I do like the look with faux leather, so that's why I've gone for faux leather. Okay, all right, so I'm just drawing a line down the centre, the full length of these. And then what we're going to do, we are going to fold each long edge into the centre. I'm just going to add a little clip part way down. We're going to sew these using our top stitch length. And you don't need to worry about back stitching at the start, although I probably will. And we're going to sew down the length of these at 1/4 inch or 6mm from the edge along the entire length on both sides. Okay, so I would recommend you start with your needle down, so you know if you need to adjust your hands, your needle's not going to go anywhere. Okay, so I've gone down the entire length of one, and I'm going to go straight onto the second one. Just take your time while you're doing this, because this will be front and centre on your flap, on your finished bag. Just sewing straight onto the second one. Okay, as I'm coming up to the end, I can snip the first one off and fold in the end, or the edge, sorry, on this first one, and feed that under the foot and just go straight onto this second one. Sorry, from the second one onto the first one, which becomes the second one, the third one. Anyway, I'm just going straight from one to the next. So I'm just folding this long edge into the centre as I go. Okay, and then we'll do our fourth and final edge. Pop this under the foot and just carry on straight onto it. Okay. Right, so that's both of those top stitched with the raw edges on the back, and they look quite nice, I think. Okay, so I'm just going to measure down and pop a little, oh, maybe I'll add a little bit of chalk. Okay, just want to double check my measurements before I tell you them. Right, so you are going to want to make a mark 3.5 inches from the end. Okay, and then we're going to fold that up onto the wrong side along that line. Okay. Now, if you're using cotton, this is obviously a bit easier because you can press it and it will stay. But if you're using faux leather, then you'll want to work like me. So with that line there folded over, so that should measure 11.5 inches. We're just gonna stitch across the bottom using our regular, our top stitching stitch length and 1/8 inch or 3mm seam allowance. Okay. Do the same on this one. Okay. Now, if you want to be sure, you can go ahead and add a dab of glue to those if you like. What I'm going to do though is I'm going to stitch using my 1/8 inch seam allowance from the top here, well, from the end, the folded over end that we've just done a seam on, and we're going to sew up as far as where we're folded over, up to there. Let me just double check that I'm telling you the right thing. Yes, okay. So on mine, I'm just going to add a little bit of chalk to tell me where we're going to go. Okay, so we're going to start here and stitch up this edge using our 1/8 of an inch or 3mm seam allowance, pivot and sew across the width here. Now I've drawn a line where my underbit finishes, so you'll probably want to go 1/8 of an inch inside and then back down the other side. If you want to make life easier, then what you'll do is you'll sew it on this side, the wrong side, okay? Because we've sewn these bits in on the wrong side, so we know it will look nice and it will match. We're going to sew up to this short end, pivot, so across the width and back down again. Okay, so we're using our top stitching stitch length and our 1/8 of an inch or 3mm seam allowance, and I'm starting with my needle down. Okay, so as I get to this short end, I'm lifting my presser foot and pivoting. Now I don't think I'm going to get all the way, so I'm changing my stitch length down. That's better. Get to where I need to go, change my stitch length back up again. And then sew to the end there. Okay. So just double check that that looks nice and neat on this right side, and that does actually, that matches my stitching that I've done along the length, because I did that on the wrong side as well. And then we'll repeat it for this second one. Okay, now don't panic about any ends of threads, because those will be hidden under the strap end. If you are not using a strap end, then I would recommend that you leave your thread tails long, pull them to the back and tie them off like we did before. Okay, that looks great. Get rid of that little bit of chalk and this little bit of chalk on that side. Great. Okay, so you've got a rectangle on the bottom section with this extra bit of faux leather on the back there, or cotton if you're using cotton. So what we're going to do next is grab hold of our flap that we've interfaced and added foam to, and I'm going to mark the centres on this flap. Okay, now this is very important because we're going to position our flap accents based on where the centre of the bag is, or centre of the flap, sorry. So try to make sure that you are accurate with that. Okay. Now, if you want to, you can draw the lines, draw the positions in on your flap using your chalk marker or whatever removable pen that you've got. Or if you're confident that you can get it lined up without drawing a line, then you can just measure. It's up to you. Okay. So we are going to place these, so wrong side down, so that's the side that's got the raw edge on it, wrong side down on top of the flap. And we're going to place them 2 3/4 inches or 7 centimeters from the center to the inner edge of the flap accent. Okay, so 2 3/4 inches. So I'm going to line up the 2 3/4 inch line on my pins that I've got in the center of my flap, and we're going to make sure that the short raw edge of this flap accent is aligned with the top raw edge of the flap, and then we're going to glue these into place. We're only going to glue between the top and this rectangle that we've sewn here. Okay, so I'm going to move that out of the way. just double check I didn't move my ruler. No. I'm going to add a bit of glue just right in the very centre of this flap accent, just to hold it in place, and I'm going as far as that short raw edge there. And when we flip this over, we need to be really careful that we don't get any glue anywhere else on the flap except where we want to position this. So just make sure my ruler is still lined up before I press down. It is. Make sure I'm nicely aligned at the top and along the length of the ruler. Once you're happy that you've got it in position, what I like to do then is pop my ruler on top and just press down gently, and just lift my hand and press, and lift my hand and press, just to make sure that that is not moving around. Okay, so bear in mind that whilst that glue is not dry, it can still be moved, so we'll be very careful with the other side. So we want to measure 2 3/4 inches from the centre on the other side. Oh, that's just shy of 6.5 there. It might be supposed to be 6.5 and my measuring's slightly off, but that's where I'm going to position the next one. So just double checking my measurements there. Add a bit of glue onto the back of this second flap accent, or flap strap thingy, as we like to call it in the business. And I'm just taking my time so I make sure I don't put too much on, just enough to hold it. Okay, and then the same as we did before, just making sure that the raw edge is aligned with the top there, and that this is aligned along the length of my ruler. And once you're happy, lift up my ruler and press down. So I think for a really nice neat finish, the best thing you can do with this is find something really heavy, like my rivet board, if you've got access to my rivet board that is, and pop that on top. Make sure you don't move your flap accents. You pop that on top. So I'm going to leave that to dry now. So I've popped my glue on, popped them on, made sure they are nice and even. Better just double check I hadn't moved those, hadn't I? Seeing as I've said it. So just double check, that should be 2 3/4 inches, that's perfectly lined up. And 2 3/4 inches. I just want to be sure that I've got them perfectly aligned before I go off and leave these to dry. Okay. So I'm going to leave those to dry, and then when we come back, hopefully they should be dry. So pause me here and do your gluing, leave them to dry, go and have a cup of tea, go and have something to eat, and then come back and we'll stitch those into place and we'll carry on with our exterior. Right, so the glue has dried on there. So what we're going to do, we're going to stitch these down onto our flap and we're going to start at the top. We're going to sew at 1/8 of an inch or 3mm. We're going to sew from the top, and we're going to sew as far as this line of stitching across the width. We're going to lift our presser foot, pivot and sew across the width, and then back up the other side. So we'll have matching lines of stitching on the bottom and the top, with this line in the middle here, which will be covered by your strap keeper. Okay, so I'm going to start at the top here. I'm going to start with my needle down. I'm using my top stitching stitch length. Okay, so I'm at that line where we've crossed over, so just turning, I'm going to sew across that line, and then pivoting again and sew up the other side. Okay, we're just going as far as the top there. Okay, then we're going to repeat that exactly the same on this second flap accent. So exactly the same as we did before. Okay, beautiful. Right, that's our flap. I quite like that. That's good. So what we need next is our strap keepers, and you should have 2 strap keepers, and you should have a washer to match each. So each strap keeper, mine are Emmeline bags, but I bought in bulk, so they come in this slightly different packaging. Each strap keeper comes with a washer and then some tiny screws. Now what we're going to do, actually I won't get the screws out just yet, just in case. I'm going to make a couple of marks where to punch our holes to install these. So they basically install directly over these flap accents like that. Okay, and they screw in from the back. So we're going to use our washers to mark where we're going to punch our holes. So we want to centre them over our stitching. So pop your washer directly on top of that stitching and then just shuffle it over slightly. Make sure that it looks nice and straight. You can measure if you'd like to. Let's go for it and measure it just to be sure. Yep, that is definitely even. And then just gonna mark my holes. And of course this pen doesn't show up on this fabric because it's very busy fabric. That would be too easy, wouldn't it? I think what I need to do maybe is get my board out and punch the holes through my washer on my fabric because it is so busy. Okay. Right, so let's pop this on. Let's reposition it, make sure they're nice and straight. Again, just to be sure. And I'll measure it to make sure that it's evenly spaced. Make sure I haven't got anything wonky going on here. Okay, that looks good to me. So because my fabric is so busy, I'm going to see if I can punch my holes through the washer. So that one did actually mark enough for me to be able to do this, I think. This would be easier if the washers were completely see-through, wouldn't it? And I suppose it wouldn't work. Okay, I suppose you could make yourself a template from some see-through plastic. That would probably be the best thing to do. Okay, so now I'm just going to make sure those holes are through to the back. Yeah, that's great. And let's go ahead and do the other set of holes as well before we're in this together, before we add any strap keepers. Okay, so I think that's around about 8 inches ish to the washer, but just make sure yours are lined up perfectly over your stitching is the key. does of course depend on you having measured straight and stitched straight and all of the other things that I struggle to do consistently. So I completely understand if you want to find an easier way to do this. Right, lovely. 4 holes. So now I can add a dab of fray check to those holes just to stop them expanding and the strap keepers coming out. Have a second to dry off. We'll need a screwdriver. What are these crosshead screws? Let's see what we've got. Let's try this one. We'll see if that fits. Might have to remagnetise my screwdriver, I think. I've just got this little set online and it comes with a magnet and it feels very, very fancy every time I have to remagnetise it. Yeah, that fits fine. Does it fit fine? Yes, okay. Okay, so this is just the same as adding any kind of hardware with screws. What you would do is line up your hardware with the holes and then add your washer on the back and then your screw through the hole, through the washer, no, through the washer, through the hole, and then through your hardware. There we go. So I've just checked that that's in the right place on the right side, and then I can screw that in. And then let's add this second one. Doesn't seem to be very magnetic, this magnetic screwdriver today. Okay, so I'm just making sure that my screw is through the hole and then line up the strap keeper. With that, I think that my flap accents are slightly wider than they should be. There we go. Or I just had it held at a slightly wonky angle. So once you're sure that the screw is in the right place, you can start screwing that into the strap anchor, or not strap anchor, sorry, strap keeper. There we go. You can give it a little bit of a tug and check it's nice and secure. That is nice and secure in both sides. Now what I'm going to do, you can add a dab of glue if you want to be extra secure. I am going to add a little scrap of tape onto the back. A bit of duct tape here, just to make sure that those screws don't even think about coming undone. There we go. Right, so we need another 2 screws. Got a couple spare then. So let's see if I can remagnetise my screwdriver a bit more. Just a little bit easier if you can. You can hang on to the screws a bit better. There we go. Right, what do we need? We need a washer. Pop that in place. Pop the screw through. And then pop the strap keeper in place. Turn it back and screw it in. Okay, so I've just done it gently because obviously you want it to be able to maneuver slightly so you can get the other side in as well. So for this side, I'm going to pop my screw through from the wrong side through the washer, and I can see it there on the right side. Just maneuver that into place on the strap keeper and then screw it into place. Okay, those both are secure, so let's just add, or just turn these screws a little bit more just to make sure they're nice and secure. And then we can add a nice bit of duct tape. I say a nice bit of duct tape, you might have not fancy duct tape and that's completely okay because nobody's going to see it. It's going to be inside your bag after all. Okay, if you can try and avoid scratching your strap keepers, so do this on something that's not going to scratch, a soft surface if you can. That would be the ideal. Okay, lovely. Right, I'll pop those 2 screws to one side where they shall be forgotten about forever, because that's what seems to happen. Okay, and that is our exterior flap done, and we're ready then to add our lining flap on as well. So that's what we'll do next. Right, next thing we need to do for the flap is add our magnetic snaps onto the flap lining. So I've used my exterior fabric for the lining of the flap because I think it'll be really nice to open my flap and have that matching. So that's what I've done with mine. Now, first things first, and what we should have done already is mark our centres. I'm just going to mark those top and bottom in the seam allowance. And then I'm going to work on the wrong side because you'll be able to see it better, but feel free to work on either side, whichever one you prefer. We'll need a bit of fray check as well. Okay, so we're going to pop these snaps and we're going to put the male halves, so that's the ones with the sticky out bits, and we're going to put them 1 1/4 inches or 3 centimeters from the bottom and 3 1/4 inches from the center. So I need my male half there, pop the female half away. The female half will go on our main panel. So it's just the male halves that we need for our flap, and 2 washers and 2 scraps of foam or Decaville or whatever you've got lying around, just to secure these. Right, so let's do a bit of measuring. I wonder whether I've got, yes, maybe a pencil would be better than a bright pink pen for this one. Okay, so we're going to measure 1 1/4 inches or 3 centimeters from the bottom. That's 1 1/4 there, and then 3 1/4 from the center. Right, hang on, I need to line this up properly. Right, so 1 1/4 from the bottom and 3 1/4 from the center is there. So I've just drawn a little dot, and that's where I'm going to put the center of my washer, and then I can mark these 2 prong lines either side of the center. And then I'll do the same for the other side. 1 1/4 and 3 1/4, and mark that corner there, and then pop my washer on, mark these prong lines either side. Okay, now we're just gonna cut through these lines, pop those to one side for the minute, and I'm just going to make really tiny snips on those lines. You can always go slightly bigger afterwards, so do err on the side of slightly too small. I'll just check how that fits, check if that's big enough, those slits. Yeah, that's fine that side, and check this side as well. Yeah, that's fine this side as well. So I'll add a dab of fray check to each of those slits. And then we can add our magnetic snaps. So I'm going to add these from the right side. and push those prongs through those slits. Now if you want an extra strong snap, you can always add a dab of glue into the centre before you add that snap, just to be sure that that is not going anywhere. Okay. Then before we add these washers at the back, we'll add a bit of foam, or if you've got some Decaville or plastic bag base or something, scrap of leather or something, you can add that. It's just to stop them pulling out, add a little bit of extra security to the back of these washers. Okay, so pop that on, and then the washer. I'll do the same on this one. I'm going to use a very technical tool to bend my prongs down. This might be something that is a new tool to you for use in bag making. It is a regular spoon. And all I'm going to do is just, I like to put my thumb in the dent of the spoon and just bend that prong down, and then bend the prong the other way on top. And I like to bend my prongs inwards because then they are gripping and holding on to themselves. They're holding on to the snap. You haven't got to worry about them coming out of the fabric because they're gripping hold of the snap. So I'll do the other one. So if you find it hard to bend the prongs in on a magnetic snap, just go and get yourself a little teaspoon out of the drawer. And this one I keep for bag making so that I don't accidentally use it in my tea and then come and use it. So that's my top tip for the day. If in doubt, get a teaspoon. Right, okay, so now I'm going to add a bit of duct tape onto the back. I've amused myself there with my teaspoon, but it's surprisingly handy for a number of reasons in bag making. So I do think that a spoon should be part of everybody's sewing kit. Okay, you can also keep one for your tea as well. If you are constantly running out of teaspoons, you can have a tea one and a sewing one. Right, so that's our flap, the lining flap sorted. So retrieve your flap that you've got the flap accents on. And we're going to fold these up out of the way. And then we're going to pop these two right sides together on top. I'm going to match up all of the raw edges. So I'll do that from the top. I'm going to pop a pin in and smooth this down this one edge to the corner. Just try and ignore the bulk of that flap accent in the way there, and then fold that back out of the way, line up my centres so you know it's all nice and even. It will bunch up a little bit where those accents are folded over, but don't worry, as long as it's flat along this seam line, you'll get a nicely finished seam all the way around your flap. Adding a few more pins in. Don't think I've got that placed quite correctly there. Not fully lined up with the edge. Just move it. And then just smooth it into place. Don't worry too much about the top edge. Just worry about the side and the bottom edges for the minute. Just make sure that's all lined up well. Okay, and then we're going to sew around the entire outside of this apart from the top edge. So we're going to leave this top straight edge open, and we're going to sew around the sides and the bottom using our regular seam allowance, 3/8 of an inch or 1 centimetre. I'm going to use my regular construction stitch length, and I'm going to back stitch at the top on each side. So I'm going to back stitch at the start and the end. Okay. So first thing I'm going to do is just check this from the inside before I trim anything, just to be sure that everything is all nice and flat and straight on that seam line, because we did have the extra bulk of the flap accents folded over there. Just want to be sure that it is nice, there's no puckers. Yeah, feels good to me. Looks all right on that side. Great, just double checking I haven't gone the other side of my basting, but I think I'm all right. Lovely. And then we need our pinking shears, and I'm just going to trim the seam allowance around these curves so that we get a nice rounded flap. If you haven't got pinking shears, you can just snip into the seam allowance, take the bulk out that way. My flap will probably be a little bit bulkier than yours because I'm using the exterior fabric, which is this beautiful kind of tweedy, flannelly kind of fabric. So hopefully yours will not be quite so thick. All right, so as we turn this right sides out, your flap accents will start popping out. That's great. And then make sure that all of the curves are nicely turned out. And this is another good use for your spoon if you've got it. I should start adding a spoon onto the tools list, shouldn't I? Patterns. I'm just running around the inside with the spoon. Okay. Now ideally we're going to give this a nice little steam press to make it sit flat. However, I am usually the sort of person who manages to catch my faux leather whenever I press something where faux leather is near. So I am going to rebel against that, and I'm just going to roll this, finger roll this seam out, and I'm going to just clip it into place and then sew top stitch without having pressed it. Now you've got the choice. You can either top stitch with the flap accents poking out and caught in the top stitching, or you can fold them back and top stitch without them caught in. I think I'm going to do mine caught in the seam allowance because I think it looks slightly neater, but you do what you prefer. Okay, there's a lot of noisy motorbikes riding around outside at the moment. I'm really sorry if you can hear them in the sound of the video. Hopefully you can't, but if you do, I'm very sorry. It's the hazards of having a studio in the town centre. Unfortunately you can't control what's going to drive past at any moment. We've got single glaze in here in the studio as well. Right. Okay, so I'm just working my way around the flap, just finger rolling that seam out so that my lining of my flap is not poking out. It's just the exterior fabric that's showing on the front, and a little clip all the way around. Okay, right, so I'm just going to flatten that down, make sure everything is nice and neat. Add my pin back in there at the top where it was. Got another loose thread there. Where do they come from, these loose threads? Just don't know. Okay, so I'm going to increase my stitch length to my top stitching stitch length, and now I'm going to start at the top here and I'm going to back stitch, and then I'm going to sew all the way around the flap, and I am going to sew over my flap accents because I want to, but if you don't want to, just pull them out of the way as you go past. That's no problem. And I'm going to sew all the way to the end here. I'm going to sew with a 1/8 of an inch or 3mm seam allowance. So I'm going to be sewing 1/8 of an inch or 3mm from the edge. Okay, and as you come close to these strap accents, just make sure that they are nice and flat or nice and straight before you start sewing onto them, because you don't want your top stitching to make them sit wonky. Okay. Oh, that looks great. Actually, I'm pleased with that. Right, I'm just going to baste along the top open end then, just to make sure that those layers stay together during construction. Okay, and you might find that you've got a little tiny bit extra on the top of the line in there. So I'm just going to trim a little bit of that off so that it's a nice straight edge, ready for when we come to add this to our bag. I haven't trimmed much off, just enough to make sure it's nice and straight. Although I wonder if that's now, oh no, hang on, I've still got it, my centre mark. Right, there we go. So I've got my centre mark again. This is important that you line up your flap with the centre mark, because you want to make sure that your magnetic snaps match on the main panel as well. So that's our flap finished. I'm going to pop that to one side, and we're going to work on the front panel of our main bag. So whichever one you want to be the front panel to go underneath the flap. Oh, I like that. That looks good, doesn't it? Well, I'm quite excited about finishing this bag now. So pop your flap to one side for the minute, and we'll work on the front panel. And we're going to add the next, or the last two halves of our magnetic snap onto this main panel. So we'll find the centres, and I'm going to find those top and bottom, because that will come in handy then when we come to add our gusset, won't it? Having the centre marked on this at the bottom as well. Okay, lovely. Right, so what do we need? We need our fray check and our pieces. I wonder if I've got a little slicey knife. I don't think I have, so I might have to use my scissors for this. If you've got a slicey knife, then you'll find that easier to add your holes for your prongs on your main panel. Right, so we are going to work, we're going to measure 5 1/4 inches or 13 centimeters from the top, and 3 1/4 inches from the center. So that's the same as we did on the flap, 3 1/4 inches from the center, or 8 centimeters. So let's turn it around so that I can see what I'm doing. So 3 1/4 inches and 5 1/4 inches. I'm liking the 1/4 inches on this pattern apparently, aren't I? Okay, so from there I'm gonna pop a dot in the center, and then I'll do the same the other side as well. So 5 1/4 from the top and 3 1/4 from the center. Just gonna double check that those are the same distance from the sides. No, they're not. Something's gone wrong here. Let's double check. 3 1/4 inches, 5 1/4 is there. Double check it the other side. I do like to get my snaps in the wrong place on this one for some reason. That is 3 1/4, 5 1/4. Okay, so now they should in theory be same distance away. So it's 2 7/8 from the edge and 2 7/8 from the edge there. Okay, lovely. Right, so now we can pop our washers into place on these center marks and mark where our prongs are going to be. just there. Now I've got a few dots in the centre here, so I'm just going to centre it over those dots. I've measured from different directions. There we go. Okay, so I'm going to snip through the foam first, and then I'll add a pin to make sure I don't go through anywhere that I'm not supposed to go. So I'll add a pin on the bottom there, and get my little unpicker and pop it in from the top of where that line should be, and just slice along till I get as far as that pin. Do this really gently. It's always better to do it slightly too small and go back and add a bit more. Right, let's double check that that is in the right place, or that's big enough. Yeah, that's fine. That's the time when you can add or make those slits slightly bigger. Now, because it's quite hard to see on this fabric and I've got the foam there, I'm going to add my snaps individually. So I'll do this one and then I'll do the second one. Just want to make sure my prong holes are big enough. Yeah, and you don't really need to add anything extra onto the back of this unless you particularly want to, because you've already got foam on the back of the panel. And then I'm just going to use my spoon again, close my prongs, and a scrap of duct tape. Okay, right, so that's one done, and I've done my foam, so I'll just pop my pin in at the end there, and then pop my unpicker in, cut through the main fabric. So this is the same as if you're a dressmaker and you do buttonholes. Add a pin to make sure that you don't go too far when cutting your buttonholes open. Okay, so let's check that from this side and check those holes are big enough. Yep, they're fine. Add a dab of fray check. Stop those holes growing or getting any bigger. And then add my snap from that side. Yep, they look great. Okay, add my washer and bend the prongs down. Okay, and then we'll add a scrap of duct tape just to finish it off. Make sure that that snap is not going anywhere, and also that it's not going to rub through to the lining. There we go. Right, so our flap is done. Let's just double check that they do line up and they do snap up okay. Yes, phew. Okay, well that's better than I've done on some bags. So that's a bonus at least. Okay, so once you're happy that those snap up, then we are finished with our flap and we're ready to move on to the gusset. Okay, so what you're going to need to do is get hold of your finished gusset, where your completed gusset, so your side gussets and your base gusset that we've sewn together and added foam to, and then mark the centre. So I've marked the centre of the base gusset in the seam allowance. I've also marked the centre of the side gussets by folding them in half and adding a pin, and then I've marked the centres of my bag base. Now if you're using a solid bag base, then you'll be able to just draw on it, but like if you're using a mesh one like me, then you'll want to add pins. Now I would urge caution when using pins, because you might find that you have to go and pop a little plaster on your pinky finger because you stab yourself with a pin. Of all the injuries to get. Right, okay, so make sure those are nicely centered and lined up like that, and then we're going to measure where our feet are going to go. So we're going 1 inch from each long edge of the faux leather and 2 inches from the short edge of the, well, where the seam is basically. So I'm 1 inch there. Do you know what? This is easier to do this without the base on. Just make sure that it's clear enough. So 1 inch from the long edge and 2 inches from the short seam. And we're just going to mark a little dot there. If you make it big enough that you can see it through your mesh bag base, then that's brilliant. If you're using a solid bag base, then you might have to do this with your base on top. Okay, so I've marked my 4 holes to make sure that they look even to you, and then we're going to pop the bag base back on top. Hopefully no more pinholes in my fingers. Okay, and I can see most of my dots, so I'm going to start with the one that I'm finding it hard to see. I'm just going to punch a hole through all of those layers. And then this one down here, and then the other 2. Can do this on the wrong side if you prefer. Doesn't matter which side you've gone for. Right, so make sure those holes are all the way through. These 2 on this end are not. Lovely, okay. So what I like to do to make sure that when I put this in the right way, I like to, so if it was like that, then it'll be like that. Make sure they do line up on the wrong side. Yep. I like to get a little bit of duct tape and pop it on the right side of the right side. Okay. So let me take these pins out because they're absolutely lethal, these pins, aren't they? So I've popped some duct tape on the right side rather than the wrong side, and on my right hand side rather than my left hand side. Obviously this will be reversed to you because you're looking on the camera. And then I'm going to add a matching piece on the back of my gusset on, again, the right hand side. So when I come to insert my bag base in through the turning gap, I can make sure that both pieces of duct tape are facing up, rather than that way around, facing up, and they are both on the same side, and then I know that my holes are going to line up perfectly for my base and my base stabilizer. Okay, right, we can pop this to one side for the minute and we'll get started on our strap tabs. We take those pins out as well, actually. Safety never takes a day off, even when it's just a pin. Pop my pen to one side of my board. Bear with me a second. Okay. Right, next thing we need is our strap tabs and also our rectangle rings. So get hold of your strap tabs and your rectangle rings and a pencil or a pen or something, or a chalk marker, and we're going to draw a line along the centre of these strap tabs lengthwise. So they're 2 inches wide at the moment, so we're going to draw a line 1 inch from the edge. And this one as well. Okay. Right, pressing board, hang on. Moving all my little bits out of the way, there we go. Oh dear, I've just lost another pin. Wonder where that was from. Okay, we'll soon find out, won't we? So what we're going to do is just press the long edges into the centre. So fold it over and then give it a little press. Oh, hang on, I'm doing this in the wrong hand. I'm right-handed and I'm trying to do this left-handed. Okay, just give those a little press. And then the other side into the centre. Give those a little press. Fabric I'm using is quite bouncy, so what I'm going to do is fold it over and also press from this side as well. And then I'm just going to pop that under my ruler just to keep it flat for a minute while I'm doing this one. Okay, let's fold one half over and give it a little press. My tiny iron, and then fold the other half into the centre and give that a little press. And then turn it over, give it a little press from this side. Okay, I'll pop that under there as well. Right, so this first one, what we're going to do is sew. You can sew on the right side, I'm going to sew on the wrong side so I can see what I'm doing. I'm going to use my top stitching stitch length. And I'm going to sew 1/8 of an inch or 3mm away from the edge. You don't need to back stitch, but you can if you'd like to. Okay, so we're going to go along the entire side, long side, and then I'll get this second one as well, and we're just going to go straight onto the second one as well. And then I'll bring the first one back round again and do along the other side. And take that first one, or the second one, back round to the back again. Lovely. And then we're going to thread each strap tab through a rectangle ring. To the centre, and I'm just going to stitch across the end there just to hold these layers together while we're working with them. And the same with this one. Thread it through to the centre and then add a bit of stitching just to hold them together. Okay, what I'm going to do next is I'm going to change my presser foot over to my narrow foot, and then I'm also going to stitch. Let me show you where we are so far. So I've got 2 strap tabs with the rectangle rings attached, and then I'm going to change over to my narrow foot and stitch as close to this ring as I can. just to make sure that when I'm using this bag, the ring can't swivel round. Because I find that really annoying if you're using a bag and the ring swivels round on the strap, and then it seems to hang funny, doesn't it, or sort of twist around. It doesn't sit quite so comfortably. Okay, right, so I'm just changing over to my narrow foot. You don't need to do this, but if you would like to, you can. Or you can always, rather than stitching it close, you can always add a rivet in close to the ring just to hold it in place. Okay, so I've left my thread tails long so that we can tie these off afterwards. I'm going to start my needle down. I'm going to sew all the way along, and then I'm going to sew all the way back along to where we started, pull it out and leave the thread tails long. Okay, and then long thread tails again to start. Start my needle down, so all the way to the end and back again. Okay, and then my thread tails long again. Right, I'll swap my foot back over. Be nice if you could just swap your feet in everyday life as well. So if your feet get tired of a day, you can just swap your feet over. Nice, wouldn't it? Okay. Right, this is always a little bit awkward for me doing this on camera because it never seems to go in first time, whereas if I'm doing it off camera, it always goes in perfectly first time. Okay, right, so now what we need to do is pull these threads through to the back and tie them off. So work on the back of your strap tab and just have a little tug on that bobbin thread and you'll see a little loop appear. And you can pop a pin through that loop and pull the thread through to the back. Right, so there's one still on the front. Which one's that? That one maybe? There we go. Okay, so because I've got 4, I'm just going to split them into 2 groups of 2. And then I'm just going to tie them in a little knot. 1, 2, and I'll do a 3rd as well, just to be sure. Although this is decorative top stitching, it's not construction stitching, so it doesn't matter too much if it's not fully secure. I just don't like to have things unravelling on me. Add a little dab of fray check onto that knot, just so that it doesn't start unravelling while I'm walking down the street. Okay, right, so there's my 2 front threads that I need to pull through to the back. And there's one of them through. Let's find the other one. I'm using very well matched thread, which makes that a little bit tricky to see where the thread is on the fabric, but I did manage it, so that's good. Right, split those into 2 and tie them in a knot. Okay, there we go. 1, 2, 3. Feel free to fast forward me if you are ever done something quicker than me. Feel free to fast forward me. Okay, there we go. And a dab of fray check there as well, just to be sure. Whew, right, slightly long-winded way of doing that, but I do like the finish that it gives, so it's worth it if you like the finish that it gives. Right, we'll retrieve our gusset now, and we're going to work at the top of these side gussets. So we need to mark the centres, and I've just popped my pencil away, of course, because that would be too easy. I'll go back to my pink pen and just fold it in half to find the centre. Oh dear, I've lost the end of my pen. Not having a very good day today, are we? Right, so I'll fold that in half, find the centre, and then add a little mark in pencil because my pink pen has gone somewhere. I've still got the lid and I've still got the barrel, but no actual pen. Oh dear. Okay, and I'll mark the centre on the other one as well. There we go. Right, so what we're going to do is add our strap tabs onto our gusset, lining up the top and lining up the centres. Okay, so I'm using this sort of quilting cotton flannelly type fabric, so I know that I can line up the top of my strap tab with the top of the gusset. If you're using something that is likely to split or fray, then what I would recommend you do is just overhang that by, I don't know, maybe half an inch or an inch or so, and have it like that on your side gusset. Okay, so I'm going to line mine up exactly with the top of the side gusset, but you can line yours up differently if your fabric is prone to splitting or fraying, or you're not confident in its abilities. Okay, so all we're going to do is, do you know what, I'll just leave it on that stitch length, that's fine. I'm still on my top stitch and stitch length, that's okay. I'm just going to sew across the top here. You can either back stitch at the start and the end, or you can go over this twice. I don't want to put too many holes in my fabric, even though it's just a regular fabric. So I've back stitched at the start and the end, just in the seam allowances, purely to hold these in place during construction, and also just to add an extra layer of security to your tabs, because your whole bag is going to be hanging from these tabs. Okay. Right, so do you know, I think I'm going to pin these into place actually, because I can see these swinging around while I'm trying to sew, but we're going to learn from past mistakes and pin towards the ring in the hope that I don't get a nasty spike on my pinky finger. Okay, right, so we're going to do exactly the same as we did for the lining now. We're going to attach the main panels to our gusset. We're just going to work with the exterior now. Okay, so fortunately we marked our centres. So all we're going to do is match the centre first. Okay, work with this however, whichever side up you prefer, doesn't matter. I'm going to do the straight edges first. I've got a bit of a random bag of clips here. I've got some really long ones and some regular size ones. Okay, so once you're happy that you've got your straight edges clipped, then we're going to move to the top edge, same as we did for the lining. You can go back to what you did on the lining if you want to at this point. Just going to go straight edges. Oh, some very big clips in this bag. Okay, so you can see my corner here, it doesn't quite fit, that's okay, we'll leave that for the minute. Do the other straight edge. Now, if you're somebody who prefers to hand baste these things, then you can hand baste this instead. Or if you prefer to staple baste, so staple these together in the seam allowance, then you can as well. My goodness, this side is almost perfectly fitting. Gosh, let's bookmark this moment as a Christmas miracle, even though it's not Christmas for me right now. Might be Christmas where you're watching. If that's you, then thank you very much. Okay, actually it does fit really well on this side as well. Wow, there we go. Okay, so we're going to change down to our construction stitch length, and then we're going to sew this into place. What I like to do is I like to sew with my main panel on the bottom and then gusset up, and then you can control if you can see any puckers coming, although this looks pretty well fitting at the moment. I'm going to use our regular 3/8 of an inch or 1 centimetre seam allowance on this one. I'm going to back stitch at the start and at the end of the seam. Right, I think I might have got ahead of myself there, because I do need to add a few little snips in here just to help that ease around the curve. I don't think I really need it, but I am just going to add a few little snips in here just to make sure that it sits really nice and flat around the corner. Oh, I've lost the clip now. Things I'm losing onto the floor are increasing. Okay. Right, so before we do anything, I'm just going to turn that right sides out around the corners and just double check that you're happy with that and how it's sitting. Yep, I'm very happy with that. So I'll grab my pinking shears and just give it a little trim around these curves just to reduce the bulk in these curves and help them to sit nice and neat. Okay, lovely. You can just check you're happy with that before we go any further. I'm happy with that. Okay. And then what do we need next? We need our second main panel, and we're going to do exactly the same. Now, I haven't marked my centre on this, so let me go ahead and mark my centre on this one first. And I'll do the top because that will come in handy when I'm putting the two panels together then. Okay, brilliant. So all we're going to do is exactly the same as we did before. So I'm going to match up the centres first, and then along the straight bits. Apologies, there's a really noisy motorbike riding around in town today. I'm really sorry if you heard that on your on the screen. Okay, and then we'll go to the side top edges. We'll go down the side and down all the way until the corner, and then we'll go from that top on the other side, and then I'll work my way down this straight edge as well. Okay, and then I'm just going to work my way all the way down to the corner, And this time I am going to add my snips in because I needed my snips once I came to sew. So I'm just snipping into the seam allowance of the gusset just to help that ease around the curve there. This is exactly the same as we did on the lining, that's all. I'll add a few snips on this one as well, just to help that ease around the curve. Do I need an extra? I'll add an extra clip. If in doubt, add an extra clip. That's what I always say. Right, so again, I'm going to sew with my main panel on top. I'm going to sew on my gusset side, but just move this first panel out of the way, however you need to be able to get it under the foot. You want whatever you sew in to be completely flat under there. Okay, I'm just going to add a pin in my top edge here. It's pulling out of the way, pulling out of shape while I try and pop it under my foot. There we go. So I'm going to back stitch at the start and the end. Same seam allowance, 3/8 of an inch or 1 centimetre, and same stitch length. Okay, as I'm coming to this corner, just flattening everything down. Okay, so you know the drill. Just have a little check round on the inside before we think about trimming anything. Looks okay in that corner. Let's check this corner again. That looks okay. Just double check all of my stitching. How have I got a loose thread in there? No idea. Okay. Yep, that all looks good. Once you're happy with it, we'll trim around these curves with pinking shears. Pop some of my clips away before I lose them again. Seemed to be a day of losing things on the floor. I'll have to sweep up afterwards. Gather all my extra bits and pieces that I've managed to lose. Okay, so I'm just trimming around the curves in the seam allowances, taking care not to cut through my stitches. If you do cut through your stitches, add a dab of fray check and then go back and just re-sew that little bit. Okay. Right. Okay, so what we're going to do now is turn this right sides out. And you can push out all of your curves. A really good look at how this bag's going to look now when we're finished with it. A few extra loose threads there as well. Okay. Right, what we're going to do now is baste these seam allowances open at the tops of each side seam. Okay, so just open these seams up. We're going to sew in the seam allowance, so around about 1/4 of an inch or 6mm from the top. I'm just going to sew back and forwards over these seam allowances just once or twice, and that will just keep these seam allowances nice and open, and it will reduce the bulk then when you come to do your top stitching and add all your layers together. Okay. I'm still using my construction stitch length. I'm going to change to my basting stitch length because I don't need it to be quite so tiny. Literally just holding these seam allowances open to aid with construction later. you're going to be in the seam allowance, so it doesn't matter too much about keeping them neat or anything. Okay, I think I'm nearly there, just one more to do. Okay. Lovely, right, so we'll take all the pins out of the seam allowances then inside. I'm actually going to leave my pins in where I've got them on the tabs. I think that will be quite handy when we come to add the lining in. I'm just going to cut a few little threads that I can see poking out extra, because otherwise I'll come to do my final top stitch and I'll be saying, where are these extra threads coming from? Although I anticipate there'll still be extra threads because there always are. Okay, right, lovely. So that's your front panel because that's got the snaps on. So find the back panel, and then we're going to line up the I know which pin it was that we lost now. It was the one mark in the center of my flap. All right, so I'm going to line up the center of the flap on the back panel. Okay, so I've got my flap there and it's right sides down, or right sides together with the back main panel. Now make sure that your flap is centered on the back here. Let me just double check that my center is in the right place. Not quite. Okay, that'd be why it wasn't centered then. Let's try that again, because this will be the difference between a straight looking bag and a slightly squiffy looking bag, which a squiffy bag is great if that's the look you're going for, but if you're not, then it can be a bit frustrating. Okay, so that for me lines up perfectly with my side seams. Okay, and now we're going to base this into place using our 1/4 inch or 6mm seam allowance. I'm going to use my basting stitch length for this. Let's add a pin at this end instead, so that it doesn't shift as I'm popping it under the machine. Okay, so just squash it nice and flat to get under the machine. However you need to maneuver this bag, just so that that bit under the foot is nice and flat. Okay, so I'm going to back stitch at the start and the end because I don't want my flap to come off while I'm adding my lining to my exterior. Just going to sew along the whole top of that back panel to attach the flap. Okay, lovely, so that's in place. Now if you are terrible for giving in to temptation, then you can pop your flap over and see what your bag looks like. Oh my goodness, that looks amazing. I love it. If you are not easily tempted, then you can just move on to the next step. That's fine. Okay, so what we need to do next is retrieve our lining, and we're going to pop the two together. Okay, so decide which side of your lining you want to be on the back of the bag. For me, I like to have my zip pocket on the back. So I'm going to pop my exterior, my bag exterior, into my lining. Let me just reposition these pins because I don't want those to be in under the foot. But I do like the idea of having them pinned in place while I'm sewing this, so I can make sure that they are hanging dead straight down. And your flap as well wants to be completely straight down. Right, so I'm going to pop this inside the lining. This will be a tight fit, but it means that you've only got to turn your exterior through once. If you find it's too tight a fit for you and you really don't like it, then just change it around so that your lining is right side out and your exterior is wrong side out, and pop them together that way. Okay, so I'm opening my seam allowances on my lining. And I'm just matching the seams, side seams at the top to start with. So open these seam allowances out and clip those together along those top edges of the seams. And then I'm going to turn and do the same on the other two seams. It's really helpful if you baste your seam allowances of your lining open as well, but I seem to have skipped that step, so I'm having to open them manually, but that's okay. Okay, so those 4 are in place. Next thing we need to match is the centre of our exterior main panel and the centre of our lining main panel, and then hopefully, in theory, these top edges should just slot together into place perfectly. And then match the centres on the back and the flap, and then these will slot together nicely as well. Okay, right, so we are going to sew around the entire top edge of the bag. Don't worry about how squashed the main panel is inside, as long as it's flat on the top edge and you can get it under your presser foot, that's all that matters really. So we're going to change down to our construction length, stitch length, and we're going to be sewing at our regular 3/8 of an inch seam allowance, or 1 centimetre if you're working in metric. I'm going to start somewhere it's nice and not bulky, so I'm actually starting on the main panel at the front there. Taking my clip off and added a pin so that I can pop this under the foot without it shifting around anywhere. Okay, and I'm going to start with my needle down, so if I need to adjust my hands as I go around, I can. I'm going to back stitch at the start and the end. Just manoeuvre this bag however you need to be able to get access to what you're sewing. Okay, right, I've gone all the way around the top. Now you'll notice I was sewing inside the bag because I've got a flatbed machine, so I'm just going to have a look round on the inside of where I was sewing and just double check I'm inside all of my basting and nothing has been missed off, nothing's gone squiffy out of the way or anything, nothing's come down. Okay, I'm happy with that, that looks good. So just trim a few extra, I feel like I could spend all day trimming extra threads with this bag. Right, so now what we'll do is open the basting stitches on our zip pocket. I'm going to turn the bag through the right way and see what we've got. Hopefully a nice bag. I'm confident that we will, because we've seen a sneak peek of it already, haven't we? We've already seen what it's going to look like. Okay. Take a few of these extra threads out of the way. Okay. Oh, now we didn't check that the zip was open on the zip pocket. So did we close it again? We didn't. It's still open. Phew. Hopefully yours is still open as well. So we're going to turn the bag through this turning gap in the zip pocket. It is a little bit tight, don't panic. Take it nice and slow. Just ease your bag out little by little. There we go. Just take your time doing this. There we go. Lovely, right. Just make sure that everything's turned out properly. All of our corners are nicely turned out. And tuck my pockets in. Tuck the lining in. Now, if you are able to press your fabric, then go ahead and give the top edge a nice press. If you're not, then just do a little finger roll at the top just to make sure that that lining is tucked down inside of the bag. I've taken my pins out of my strap tabs now because they need to be protruding when I do my top stitch. So I'll do this on both sides. Don't worry too much about the turning gap and the zip pocket just yet. We'll come back to that in a minute. Okay, so I'm just clipping on the side panels first, or the side gussets first, and then you should find that your main panels kind of fall into place with the lining. Okay, all the way around the top there. Now my lining is a really lovely snug fit, so that's great. Okay, and then on this top edge there, I'm just tugging inside the zip pocket to make sure that that's down nice and taut. I'm just going to add a few pins in on the lining just to make sure that that is kept down in place. If you press your the top of your bag, then you shouldn't have these problems. Now, because I've got a flat bed, I'm going to change up to my top stitch length, but I want to top stitch on the outside of the bag, but I can't do that with a flat bed the way it is at the minute. So I'm just going to turn this bag inside out so that as I pop it through the machine, I will be stitching on the exterior of the bag, even though I'm stitching inside the bag. Okay. Oh, another loose thread. Okay. So it doesn't matter too much whether everything is all sort of pushed out fully, as long as your top edge is nice and flat and turned out. Okay, so I think I'm going to start around about here-ish, maybe, where the side panel is, and I'm going to sew it around the front and then onto the back. Now, with my top stitching, I wonder whether I should maybe swap to a different bobbin thread. I don't think that would be a terrible idea, just in case I do go a little bit wibbly. It's always quite risky using a contrast thread, isn't it? So, and I'm going to leave my thread tails long and then pull my threads through to the back and tie them off again. I think that will make a nice nice finish. Oh dear. Right, don't want to lose my orange bobbin because I'll need that, because we are yet to sew the strap for this bag. It's a great clutch at the moment, isn't it? But it's not a very good bag. Okay, so I'm just manoeuvring this under my foot so I can start on the exterior. Okay, so I'm going to start with my needle down so that if I need to adjust my hands at any time I can. And I'm sewing inside the bag here on my flatbed machine. If you've got a free arm, you won't need to do that. Okay, so I'm just taking my time. I'm sewing at 1/8 of an inch or 3mm from the edge. And just make sure that whatever goes under your foot is nice and flat, not puckered at all. Just take your time going round. And just pull the bag out of the way however you need to be able to pop this under your foot. Okay, so my strap tabs I've made sure are protruding, but we're coming around to the back flap, well, to the flap. So I need to make sure that that is also positioned correctly. So as I come to my flap, I'm just going to flatten that out so that I'm sewing with the flap on one side and the main panels on the other. Pulling my threads from the start of the seam out of the way so that they don't get tangled up. Okay, and as I pull this out of the machine, I'm just going to leave my thread tails long again. Right, let's have a little check of the top stitching before we go any further, just to make sure that everything is as it should be. A few extra tiny little threads there. I wonder if maybe I should just leave these threads till the end, do them all in one go, because it doesn't seem to matter how many you clip off, there's always more, isn't there? Right, I'll take these pins out before I spike myself. Okay, so turn to the back side, the bobbin thread, and then I'm gonna just pull these threads through from the right side, the orange threads, and you will end up with a little hint of the orange in this knot, but that's okay. I think that's neater than having a bit of back stitching. Okay, so again I'm going to separate these off into 2 pairs, just tie a knot. Now if your stitching starts and ends a little bit of a distance away, then you probably don't want to do them into 2 pairs. You probably want to tie each pair separately, just to be sure it's nice and neat. Okay, so I've tied those off, and even though it's only my top stitching, I'm still going to add a dab of fray check because I don't want them to come undone and unravel while I'm walking along the street. Right, so for me, the next thing I need to do is turn my bag the right side out. For you, your bag is probably already the right side out. So you can just have a daydream about where you're going to take your new bag while you're waiting if you want. Okay, make sure all of those curves are pushed out nicely. Right, now it's time to retrieve our bag base, and remember I added my little bit of duct tape onto there, so I'm going to have a little look through, and I can see my duct tape is on this side, so I'm going to pop my base in so that the duct tape is on the same side, both right side up, but on the right hand side rather than the left hand side. Okay, don't worry too much about getting it in the right place just yet, because hopefully your feet will pull that into place. So you should have some feet. Oh no, I forgot my feet. Okay, that's probably the only thing that you would ever hear a bag maker saying rather than anybody else. I'm going to go and get my feet, and then I'll come back and we'll add the feet into the base. Okay, sorry about that. I've got my feet. Okay, so all we're going to do is reach through. I've got one hand in through my zip pocket and one hand on the outside, and I'm just going to pop that foot through. Now I just need to find where the hole is in my mesh bag base. A little bit easier to find the holes if you're using a solid bag base. There we go. Okay, so once you're sure that you've found the hole, poke your foot through and open out the prongs. Don't know if you can see what's going on in there. And then do the same on the second foot. So I've poked it through to start with. And now I need to find out where the holes are, or the hole is on my mesh bag base. I think that's right. Just have a bit more of a look, double check. I think that's right. So I'll open up my prongs now, and then add my third foot. Let's see if I can find my hole on the base. Can see it. I think I need 3 hands for this one, because I can see it and I can see the hole, but I can't seem to get the prongs through the hole. There we go. Okay. Right, so just double check how you're looking on the bottom and that it's not pulled or angled or anything. No lumps or bumps. So in theory, this one should go straight through. Yeah, there we go. And then I can open up the prongs inside. You can use your spoon for that if you'd like. Okay, so just to secure these feet, I'll add a little scrap of duct tape to the back of each of them, just to keep those prongs in place. I don't want them to work loose over time. Also, it will stop them scratching through to your lining. There we go, that's 2. And I'll do this last 2 as well. So you should find that your bag base is sitting quite nice and centered over your gusset. Oh, I've run out of duct tape. We're not having a very good day today, are we? Losing multiple things on the floor, running out of duct tape. I think I've got another roll up here. I'll have to use regular tape and then come back and add a bit of duct tape afterwards. Okay. There we go. Okay, so what you're going to do now, once you're happy that your feet are in place, oh, that looks great. I'm pleased with that. That looks very good. Just double checking I haven't got any more duct tape up here somewhere else. No, so what you're going to do is pull the zip pocket out, and we're going to turn these turning gap, or these ends, over along that line of stitch holes. Okay, and while you're doing that, I'll run down and get some duct tape. Shall I just double check that there's nothing else I need before I go? I've got my strap, got my strap slider, I've got my ends, and I've got, right, I think I've got everything. I'll be right back. Right, I've replaced it as if by magic. I wish video editing worked in real life as well, and then I could pause myself and say, you're going to run out of duct tape, go downstairs and get it. That would have been so much easier, wouldn't it? Right, so I've just folded along this little line of stitch holes. We'll do the same on this side as well. Just using my fingers to do a little finger press along that line of stitch holes, and then I'm going to open my seam slightly so that I can fold these together. And then we're just going to sew along the entire bottom of this zip pocket just to close this turning gap. And I think I've still got my white in my bobbin thread, so that will look very nice and finished. Although if anybody is looking in your zip pockets, then you need to tell them to stop being so nosy. And if they do look in your zip pockets and then judge you on your thread being a contrast colour, then it'll serve them right for being nosy. Okay, right, I've got a thread there. Let's get that before I stitch it closed. Okay. Obviously this is easier if you just fold it under and give it a steam press. But I'm trying to go along the original line of stitch holes so that it's nice and neat. Okay. Right, lovely. So I'm going to use my construction stitch length and I'm going to sew as close to the edge as I can without going off the edge. You can, if you prefer to hand stitch, then you can do a ladder stitch here. I'm just going to do a close top stitch. Oh, lovely. That looks very nice and neat. Okay. So we can pop our pocket back inside. And then that's the main part of our bag done. And we can get on with the strap, and then that's the last thing. So I'm just going to smooth down my lining inside. If you want to give your bag a little press, that would be absolutely perfect timing to do that now. I'm going to leave mine snapped closed, and then I can sit and look at how lovely it is while I'm sewing the strap, which is my least favourite thing to do. But apparently it doesn't matter leaving it to the end, because you've still got to do it, which is a shame. Okay. Oh, I like that. I think that's nice. Quite pleased with that. Right, so I'll pop that to one side and we'll get on with the strap. So we need our strap piece and our strap slider. I better change my bobbin thread as well back to the orange. So that'll be quite obvious, I think, if I use white on my strap. Pop my orange in. Now if you're using a fabric for your strap that you can press, then you've got two choices. You can either do it the way that I'm about to do it, or you can just press it into the centre. It's your choice. So my faux leather can't be pressed, so what I'm going to do is just draw a line in the centre. So my strap is 4 inches wide, so I'm just going to draw a line 2 inches from the long edge, which should in theory be the centre, and do that the whole length of the strap. Okay. And don't worry if your strap is slightly wonky, because we'll even it out as we sew it. Okay, so I'm going to go on to my top stitching stitch length. Now if you can press your strap, then what I recommend you do is fold each long edge into the centre, or they were attached. Fold each long edge into the centre and give it a good press. If like me you can't, then we're just going to fold each long edge into the centre and stitch this into place using a 1/2 inch or 1.2 centimetre seam allowance. So let's see if I've got a seam guide in here. I have, so I'm going to pop a seam guide on mine. Now remember, if you've got a computerized sewing machine, don't use a seam guide, a magnetic seam guide on your machine, because it will interfere with the electrics in your computerized sewing machine. Okay, so all I'm going to do is just start at the top and start my needle down, because this is quite a long length of strap, and I'm just going to sew at a 1/2 inch or 1.2 centimetre seam allowance all the way down. So I'm folding as I go, so that long edge folds to meet the line in the middle. And before this disappears off the end, I'm just going to pull it up onto the table. You can tell I've done that before. Okay, and then we're going to do exactly the same down the second side. So just folding this long edge into the centre and stitch into place using a 1/2 inch seam allowance. Okay, oh, I forgot to pull the end up onto the table there. Luckily it didn't shoot off and fall on the floor like it usually does. Right, okay, so we've got both of our sides sewn in to the centre with our 1/2 inch seam allowance. Although if you're using fabric that can be pressed, you probably just press those into place and that's fine. Now this is the raw end or raw edge side. What we're going to do is fold this backwards onto itself and match up those folded edges there. Okay, and then we're going to sew across this end using a 1/4 inch or 6mm seam allowance, using our regular construction stitch length. This is going to give us a beautifully finished, fully enclosed strap. Okay, and we're going to do the same on the other end as well, where I appear to have a bit of a tangle here. Did you know what it's called when it bundles up underneath? It's called bumble bunching. That's quite funny. Apparently that's what it's called. Okay, so just take it and fold the raw edges out, match up these folded edges, and then we're going to sew across this short end, same as we did before. 1/4 inch seam allowance. Okay, so because I've back stitched, I can just trim these little threads off. I just didn't use my automatic thread cutter because sometimes it leaves a little bit of a bunch and I don't like that in straps. Just cut those off and cut that one off while we're at it. And then what we're going to do is just trim the corners of each end like so. Okay, and then we'll do the other side as well. Do them both together, seeing as we're here. I'll just trim the corners off there. Okay, and then just going to turn that right sides out. And this is also where your spoon is going to come in handy. Just use the handle of the spoon to turn that out really nice and neat so that it's nice and straight there. You can add a little clip if you like. So this one also, will turn this right sides out by turning under and use my spoon to just turn that corner out, make sure it's really nice and neat, and then add a little clip. Now what we're going to do, if you are using fabric, then go ahead and give this a nice press all the way down the length of it. But what we're going to do is just fold it over and top stitch around all 4 edges, firstly to close this raw edges in, so it'll be a nicely fully enclosed strap, and also to give it a nice finish. Okay, so left my thread tails long, and I'm going back to my top stitching stitch length, and then we're going to stitch using a 1/8 of an inch or 3mm seam allowance. I'm not going to back stitch at the start because I've left my thread tails long. I'm going to tie those off. So as I'm sewing, I'm just folding these edges together and sewing along the length of these folded edges. Just working my way down the length of this strap. Before I go off the end, let me pull this back on. Okay, so as I get close to this end, I'm going to stop with my needle down, lift my presser foot, pivot, lower my presser foot and sew along the short end. And then lift my presser foot, pivot and carry on sewing. Right, so I'll leave those thread tails long. I can tie those off from the back. Pull these front threads through to the back. I think I just managed to pull a back thread to a different place then. Oh, yeah. Close enough, eh? Right, that one's through. Let's pull this other one through. Okay, lovely. So I'm going to split these again into 2 pairs. And tie these off. And I'll do a third one just to be sure. Give that a little trim. Okay, and a dab of fray check. And then what we'll do is grab our strap slider. I'm using a wide mouth strap slider from Emmeline Bags. Just because of my faux leather, I want to be sure that it manages to go through okay. So I'm going to pop this through. I'm going to, does it say how far to pop it through? Let's double check before I go ahead and get ahead of myself. So it says to turn it through by 1.5 inches or 3.8 centimeters, and then stitch to secure it. So all I've done is just popped it through both sides of the slider there. Okay, lovely. And then I'm going to stitch that to secure it. I'm going to sew on the other side so that I can make sure that my stitching it is nice on the side where it'll be seen. Okay. And I'm going to go back. If you prefer, you can just add a rivet there instead of stitching. So again, I'm going to pull my threads through to the bobbin side, if I can. I wonder if I might have a hand needle up here instead, which might make that a little bit easier and a little bit faster than pulling them through. Let's have a look. No, I haven't even got the things that I was supposed to have, so why I thought I might have a hand... Oh, hang on, I have got a hand needle. My little sheep contains a hand needle. Great. Okay, so which was the right side? That's the right side. So let's thread these through to the back. I don't know if this is quicker than pulling them through individually. It seems to take me forever to thread the needle. But the thought is there. Okay. So I've got both of those threads. I'm just gonna thread those through to the wrong side. That was a lot easier, wasn't it? Once I actually got the threads into the eye of the needle. I'll tie those off. Now, if there's a right side to your strap slider, then it should be facing up on this bit of the strap that we've got the fold over on, okay? And then we need to retrieve our very nearly finished bag. Now have a look at the pictures on the pattern, because they tell you which end to thread through, and this is to wear it on your right hip, so on your left shoulder and right hip. If you prefer to wear your bag the other way round on your left hip, then just change these instructions, just mirror these instructions. Okay, so with the strap slider right side up and my fold over right side up, I'm going to thread the loose end through the rectangle ring on the left. So that's how it is for you. Okay, so that's on the rectangle ring on the left, strap slider right sides up and the front of the bag facing you. And then you're going to take this loose end of the strap and push it through from the wrong side of the strap slider and out the other side, like so. Okay, and then all we're going to do is just thread that through from the right side to the back. Just make sure that you're happy with how that looks before you secure it, and then we'll just secure that end of the strap with some stitching, or you can add a rivet if you prefer. Okay, so I'm just going to pop my bag underneath there just so I can add some stitching. I'm going to start my needle down just so I know that if I need to readjust my hands, I know where it is. And I'm going backwards over it one time. Now, you don't want to do too many rows of stitching on faux leather, especially where straps are concerned, because you don't want it to split where the line of stitching is. Okay, so seeing as I've found my needle, are we going to have any better luck threading these through to the wrong side, or should I just use my original bobbin thread method? That might be quicker. I'm sure there's a trick. If there's a trick to getting both threads into one eye of a needle, would you let me know? I'd really appreciate it. Okay. I'm halfway there. Get the other one threaded through. There we go. Both are threaded through. We'll tie those off. As I said, if you want to add rivets into your strap, then that would be a really nice extra touch onto your strap. Give it a really nice finish. You could add one on your strap tab and a matching one on your strap then. Give it an extra bit of a bling, although sewing it is just as good. Right, so we are completely finished apart from adding the ends, our strap ends, onto the flap accent ends. Right, first thing I'm going to do is trim off these sticky outy little thread ends. Okay. There we go, because we don't want those poking out, do we? Trimming those back as far as I can get them. And then you're going to need your strap ends. So if you haven't got those already, it's time to retrieve them. Right, here are mine. And what we're going to do first, before we go ahead and glue, just going to make sure they fit on perfectly and they're not too big, not too baggy. If they are a bit too big and baggy, just add a little bit of extra padding just inside that channel before you add it onto your accent. Okay, first things first, add a dab of glue. Into the strap ends. You can add it on to your flap accent or onto your strap end, whichever one you prefer. And just wipe away the extra there. I don't want to get the extra on my nice shiny end. And then we need a screwdriver. Now, which one did I use for these? I don't know. Did I take, oh I did, I took a picture with the end showing, so it was my green one. Well done me. Obviously thought ahead on that one. So I need 2 of these little screws per strap end. Turn this over very, very gently. Make sure that's still in place. And then all we're going to do is just add these screws. I'm pushing the strap end onto the strap while I do this, just to make sure that it stays in place where it should. And then the second one. Oh dear, this one's demagnetized as well, I think. Just add the second one. You might find that as you add these, a little bit of glue splurts out. So just make sure to wipe that off. Okay, lovely. That can just wait and dry for a minute. And then we'll do the second strap end. I need 2 more screws. I've got lots and lots of these little screws left over, and I think they always add a couple extra just in case you lose any, but the problem is I've got so many extra and I can't remember which hardware they're from. Right, for this one I'm going to add a bit of glue to the end of the flap accent, just so you can see both ways. Pop that on, make sure there's no glue spurted out the front. No. Make sure it's all nicely centered. and right on the end of that flap accent, and then again holding it in place, add screws, first one then the other. If you're worried that this might go a bit squiffy while you're screwing them in, just screw the first one into about halfway where you can feel it's in but it's not fully secured. Then do the second one and then go back and tighten up the first one again. Okay, check I haven't got any extra glue spurted anywhere there. I think we're all right. I'm just gonna double check these screws, see if a bit of extra wiggle room. Lovely. Right, that is it then. Your bag is finished and ready to go. I would probably leave it overnight just for that glue to dry on the strap ends, but if you're in a hurry and you need to go out, then you've got the screws securing them, so you don't need to worry too much. Off you go with your new Stanley satchel. There we go. I'm quite pleased with that. I think that looks great. I hope you are too. Thank you very much for sewing along with me if you have. If not, then thank you for watching, and I can't wait to see what you make. Please do come and tag me, come and show me what you've made. Thanks for joining me.